Today, we're going to be talking about Chris Jones' potential deal, expanding 13 personnel for the Chiefs, and roster building today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I thank you for making us your first listen. And if you have another chance, go listen to the Locked On NFL show. They're doing a great job over there. Or maybe check out Locked On Fantasy Football. Vinny Iyer can get you ready for your NFL draft or for your NFL fantasy football draft that is going to be coming up shortly. Today, we are brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Seth, great to have you on again. It's been a little bit. We are recording this a little bit early for Monday's show. If Chris Jones's deal does drop, I will be having more information on that over the weekend. But we are going to talk about it a little bit. Quinnen Williams agreed to a 4-year contract, $96 million, that includes $66 million guaranteed. I don't think, at least as of this recording, I haven't seen the structure yet, which is always important.
Yes.
$66 million guaranteed means he's going to have guaranteed money into his third year. I can say that. But I haven't seen structure, so I have no idea how they structured the deal. I don't think Kansas City's probably going to really care about the structure. Here we go. This is what I was looking for. Quinnen Williams, 4 years, $96 million. Jeffrey Simmons, 4 years, $94 million.
Yep.
Jerron Payne, 4 years, $90. Dexter Lawrence, 4 years, $90. Javon Hargrave, 4 years, $84. Ed Oliver, 4 years, $68. So all those guys are on that list. And I think Chris Jones is probably going to come in. I think you're right, probably close to $25 million a year. And it may be more than that. From what I've heard from different people and from what I've seen, it doesn't sound like Chris Jones wants to reset the market and beat Aaron Donald.
Right.
I think he understands that he can't ask that. But I'm not going to be shocked if they're asking for 25, 26, maybe 26 and a half, maybe even $27 million.
Yeah, that wouldn't shock me at all. So right now I'm looking at Over the Cap's interior defensive lineman list, which you're probably looking at that or Spot Track. Spot Track? Yeah, either way.
Yeah.
I've heard it both ways. Been watching a lot of Psych lately, so I've heard it both ways is on my brain. So what's interesting here, when you look it up, and right now they don't, on Over the Cap, they don't have Williams, which would slot in as the second highest, right?
Right.
So right now, like I'll do the top 3 non-Donald guys. We'll do the average per year. And I like that you're talking about structure is everything. I assume your listeners are pretty hip to that kind of stuff. He said like a 90-year-old man, but they kind of understand, the ins and outs. The total guaranteed is what really matters. The fully guaranteed is what really matters. Everything else is largely air. However, that doesn't mean it's not important, because there's a reason why Daron Payne is $22.5 million and Jeffrey Simmons is $23.5 million total, average per year. Even though that average per year is always a lie. It's always a lie. It's never real. It's like Tyreek Hill's, last year of his contract is $50 million.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because if Chris Jones is willing to do this and he says, I want to have a higher APY than Aaron Donald, you can do it. Make his fourth year astronomical and you can make it whatever you want it to be. APY doesn't really matter.
And it's
all about guaranteed money and structure.
You can do all sorts of weird things in terms of that's that Canadian smoke. Yep. Put out your fires, Canada. Now, I know everyone thinks that Minnesota is the same thing as Canada, but I mean, it's not our wildfires. We have too many lakes. Anyway, so that you could do that. I'm guessing his agents, I mean, they're the Katz brothers. They've been doing this forever. They probably know. It's like, look, man, if you really want that, we can do that. But they would have to make concessions in order to get that. And so what's going to make the most sense is, okay, what's the total guaranteed? What's the fully guaranteed? What's the bonus look like? Jones is in a position where, because this isn't his first big contract, I'm guessing, I could be wrong, because you got to remember the human side of this. I'm guessing the signing bonus isn't as big a deal to him as it is for players when they get their first big contract. Because let's say, you're a guy who's, like Jones was, a second rounder. Your first big contract, up till now, you've been making, somewhere between, $750,000 a year to $2 or $3 million a year. Good money, certainly. But you've never made that holy cow, life-altering, paycheck like a first rounder already would have, right?
Right.
Like generational wealth. That's actually the way one player, when I was talking to him about his contract when he was leaving town, what he referred to it as, he was talking about another player actually, it was about generational wealth. They really do view it this way because they understand, this isn't just about them. This is about their kids and their kids' kids and their brothers and their sisters. It's a whole deal. Well, Jones has already gotten generational wealth. He's already gotten an $80 million contract. It says something about him that his last contract, which was signed 3 years ago, is still like a top, 8 contract.
Yep. So
he doesn't need the signing bonus to be, 20 million or whatever to get that first big paycheck. What I would think, and this is one thing I was going to say, so you get the top 3 guys that aren't Aaron Donald, is 22.5 million, 23.5 million, 24 million, then suddenly boom, 31.5 million. Everyone seems to reasonably agree that 31 is kind of silly. And so I think you're right. You're going to end up at 25, 26, 27. At that point, it's kind of hot air. So hopefully that's not, I'm assuming that's where they're at, just kind of figuring out that level and getting it done.
So the big question is, what is this contract going to end up at? And we're going to find out in the next couple of days, I think. I think he's going to be, in all reality, they have until, I think, almost Friday before he actually reports. So
yeah,
they have a week to get this deal done, basically, at this point. So I think that they're going to be fine. I think this deal is going to get done. Structure is going to play a big part in how it works out for the Chiefs. And that's something we're going to be looking at once we get that information, we get the deal. But this is going to get done. I think Jones is going to be happy, and I think that he's going to end up retiring a Chief.
The interesting thing for me, though, is that he is surrounded by as much talent as he's had there. Spags is a really good defensive coordinator. And we saw, I think, and I'm curious what you think on this, we saw the effect of a defensive line coach like Joe Cullen last year, where you saw Jones take even another step forward beyond what I figured he'd peaked because he was already an elite player. But you saw that effect, not just on him, but on like Karlaftis coming in and being competent in year one. I think you saw it with Colin Saunders. You saw it with the scheme overall, being able to generate pressure even when guys weren't winning as much one-on-one besides Jones. It was a cool thing to watch. And that, again, I think year two with a guy like Cullen, who kind of helps with some of the games up front and obviously with the coaching points, I think that is an underrated factor in this, in him understanding, trajectory for a Hall of Fame career. The best trajectory is in Kansas City.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment when we get back. But I want to tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and free. Then add your job. Go to LinkedIn Jobs right now, add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on and can dictate with just the right skills and experience so you quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So you bring up a great point, and this is something I did want to say. Jones actually looked better last year than I've seen him look most of his career. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is Joe Cullen. And so it's going to be curious to see how much more Cullen can get out of him this year than he got last year. And really going forward, because Jones didn't show any possibility of really slowing down last year, which at 29, you would think maybe there'd be a little bit of a drop-off, but he doesn't have it. So it's definitely going to be something to watch. But I do want to talk about your article about expanding 13 personnel, because I do think that that's going to be something that Kansas City is going to look at this season. You start looking at what Travis Kelce was able to do, and do think that they need to get Noah Gray more involved, and it'd be great if they could get a guy like Jody Fortson involved as well. But do you think the 13 personnel is going to help lower also Travis's? I mean, obviously he'd be on the field for those. Do you think it's going to possibly help lower his snap count?
Oh, 100%. And you can see in his snap count percentages last year, he was on the field, I think, a little under 80% of the time, which for him, that's a step backward. And part of that is they trusted.
But just as productive. Sorry,
yeah,
I just want to say that.
Right. And what that shows is they could do that. They could keep him off the field, that 20% of snaps, save him a little wear and tear without tells, right? Without giving anything away necessarily. And part of that was their depth at tight end. And that's where, Noah Gray played a pretty critical role. I think he was on the field about 50% of the snaps last year. And some of that was they played a lot more 12 personnel than they used to. That 13 personnel is really interesting to me, though, in the idea of trying to make teams wrong no matter what they do. So that's what I wrote about. I do think they want to keep getting Noah Gray more involved. He's kind of taken a more traditional tight end development trajectory than like what we saw with Kelsey. And he's never going to be, people ask me all the time, who are they going to have replace Kelsey when, Kelsey, hopefully in like 5 years? Exactly. You can't. Let's say Kelsey let's say he continues to be as incredible as he's been for another 2 or 3 years, then starts to drop off a little. You still don't replace him. You can't replace 80% of what Travis Kelsey does because he's such a unique player throughout history. Yep. And what will happen when Kelsey, when the wheels fall off, as he put it on his podcast, and he has to hang it up, they're not going to replace him in the offense. They're going to change the offense. Right. Similarly to how they changed the offense without Hill. So the 13 personnel, and you can check it out on the Substack if you want to take a look at it. The great thing I liked about their 13 personnel looks, and I think they're going to lean more into this because right now, last year, they never really kept more than 3 tight ends active on the roster, right? It was either kind of Fortson or Bell, depending on who was hurt or who wasn't. This year, so far, I could be wrong, it looks like they're trending towards 4 tight ends. And when you have an elite guy like Travis Kelsey, which obviously he's one of a kind, what that means is you can line up in 13 personnel and other teams still have to play nickel sometimes, or they won't stack the box. And it forces them to play you differently because of Kelsey. Well, no, we got to stick to nickel or dime. Then they'll just line up and run the ball down your throat. It really is kind of that simple in some ways in terms of we can do whatever out of this personnel. And San Francisco's been doing that to teams for years with 21 personnel.
And the other thing that I like about 13 personnel is although you may not be taking Travis Kelsey off the field, this is a little bit deeper than I would normally go. But when it comes to Travis Kelsey, if he's not lined up as an inline tight end, and he's lined up outside as a wide receiver, yes, he's on the field for a snap. But if he's not throwing the ball, that doesn't give him the wear and tear that a normal tight end would have. Absolutely. And that is important. Like, yes. Even if you're not talking about snap counts and he's on the field, if he's not getting hit at the line or even if he's just getting jammed by a cornerback, that's not going to be a big deal. It's it's the chips that are coming at him from defensive ends and being next to the offensive line and taking those types of shots or catching the ball and taking those types of shots that really add up. It's not going to be him out as a wide receiver running a route. That's not generally going to count. And that's not, well, it's going to count, but it's not going to hurt his body like a normal snap for a tight end would. That Absolutely. Does matter for a guy like him and his age.
Yeah, it does. I mean, he's 33 now, I want to say.
Yep.
And that takes a wear and tear. Tight end is an incredibly physical position. And figuring out a way to protect him a little bit, that does matter at this stage. And I love that you pointed out that they were able to protect him a little last year. Although he made an interesting comment on New Heights where he'd commented that physically last year was the toughest year for him. And I'm assuming it's not going to get easier. I mean, that's just right. It's so. But if you can protect him as much as you can keep him healthy, keep him on the field, and still, taking 75% of the snaps, but not taking unnecessary shots. Teams about, I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, probably longer actually, but they just started beating the daylights out of Kelsey when he would go on routes because that's what Belichick would do, right? Yep. He would make sure, whoever he had at edge tried to lay a shot on Kelsey coming out of his route. And then he would have Hightower try to, smack him coming across the middle of the field. And in the meantime, he'd have Gilmore sitting there jamming him and trying to, that was I always tell people when Tyreek Hill was still in town, if you want to know who the most important player besides Mahomes is in Kansas City, or, even, in like the 2017 season, that kind of stuff, watch the way the Patriots defend Travis Kelce. Now, they were terrified of Tyreek Hill too. They were doing the shells before it was cool, having two guys back. But the way they focused everything on Travis Kelce, and now other teams, they've all imitated that. They just try to beat the daylights out of him over and over. And by utilizing 13 personnel, by having Kelce maybe line up in the slot with the other two guys, maybe in an H-back spot, one on the line, that sort of thing, you can punish teams for focusing too much on Kelce because there's the legitimate threat of a run. You can't put your linebacker over here and while your corner's also over there and having your edge, focusing on a chip when they might just run down your throat the other direction. And so it's a cool thing. It's not invincible. Because, eventually, if you face a dominant defensive line that can control the line of scrimmage a little bit, then you can still have 6 guys in the secondary. And that's what the Eagles tried to do. Not really successfully, but there are going to be answers for it. But I do think the Chiefs are on the cutting edge of something new, yet again, with teams switching to all these Fangio-style shells where there's almost always 2 safeties back. There's almost never 8 guys in the box anymore. I think the Chiefs are one of the first teams to really start leaning into that 12 and 13. And I think you're going to see it. I didn't see any answers for it last year, which makes me think, knowing Andy Reid, until a team starts answering it, he's one of those guys. He will just hammer away at the same. He'll just keep, just pressing that easy button over and over and over.
And that's exactly why I was kind of surprised when you start looking at what they did in the draft. I thought they were going to go tight end at some point, not because I don't like Noah Gray, not because I don't like Jody Fortson, but because you're right. They've been consistently using this 12 and 13 personnel. And as you said before, and Ryan and I have talked about this ad nauseum, you're not going to replace Travis Kelce. There is no replacement for Travis Kelce. He's a generational talent at the position, and I won't argue with anybody that wants to say anything otherwise.
Right.
But then you also talk about, and you kind of brought this up earlier about going to 4 tight ends, which actually leads us into the next point of roster building. When you start looking at this roster and you start looking at how you're going to have to make cuts that you're not going to want to make, 4 tight ends is something that they've done for years here in Kansas City. I expect it to continue this year, but it makes all the other positions that much harder because then you're looking at wide receiver. And we haven't even talked about DeAndre Hopkins, and I don't really want to go into that because we have talked about it on the show a ton.
Sure.
But you bring in Hopkins, who are you going to keep behind Hopkins? Because that really, you're sitting there right now already having a roster jam at wide receiver. Offensive line, defensive line, that's all going to be a problem. You just don't have enough roster spots.
And I think that's probably why my personal theory is that the fullback roster spot, that active every week spot, I think that's going to go to the 4th tight end. And so that'll ease it a little bit, although you're really just taking it. Because I've had a bunch of people ask me, well, maybe they'll carry 7 wide receivers this year because they've got that extra roster spot. And I think they're way more likely to carry 4 tight ends week in and week out. Because if 13 personnel is even a decent sized chunk, and really even 12 personnel, you need to go into every game knowing that you can keep running those looks. And if you don't have 4 tight ends, you're 1 injury away from not being able to run those looks.
If you're looking at the receivers, the top 4 wide receivers are pretty set. You're not going to get rid of Tony. You're not going to get rid of MVS. You're not going to get rid of Sky Moore or Rashee Rice. All 4 of those guys are going to be there.
Oh, yeah.
So you have 2 spots left, really. And I agree with you. They're set. I think that they like Justin Watson. I think they like Richie James.
Yep.
So if you're going to take their spot, you're going to have to beat them, and you're going to have to beat them bad. And it goes a step further because you also have to be able to contribute to special teams probably if you're going to take one of those guys' spots.
Very, very likely, yes. And I don't know whether Richie James was a special teams guy in New York. I mean,
He was.
And so, that might be like a Dave Talbot thing. Let's say they get Jones signed, call up Hopkins and say, hey, did you see that deal we gave Juju last year? We'll give you that deal. And now that's probably $4 or $5 million less than the Titans are going to offer him. So he gets to make a decision. And I won't judge anyone for wanting to make an extra $4 or $5 million in a single year. That's a lot of money. That's totally his call.
Right. But the real reality with him is if he wants to chase a ring, this is his only chance. And I'm not trying to say he shouldn't take less money. I agree with you. If he wants the money, go for the money. But if you really want to chase a ring, this is where you do it. I mean, you could do it in Buffalo.
Yeah.
Although that's questionable whether or not they're going to be able to get there. And obviously it's still technically questionable whether or not Kansas City can get there. Just because they won the Super Bowl last year doesn't mean they can get back this year.
Right.
They still have to play well. They still have to do all that. And I trust that they will take care of what needs to be done.
Right.
But it's going to be up to Hopkins. Does he want to have a chance at a ring, or does he want the money? Because you're not going to be able to have both.
And especially in this 1 year. Yep.
Yeah, you made a great point, though. They could give him a Juju type deal and make it incentive laden, and maybe that's what gives him the ability to come to Kansas City.
Right.
But that's a big question.
Right. And he might not want to do that. And I can understand why he wouldn't. There's more of a market for him than there was for Juju last year. My understanding is Juju did take a little less in terms of guaranteed money. And I get why Hopkins might not want to do that when he was on the field last year. He performed really, really well, played at a very high level. He's in a weird spot where really this might be the last year, depending on how this year goes for him, that there is even this kind of market for him. And the market has been relatively muted because of his age and because, he had that injury last year and all that stuff. So it'll be interesting. But the big thing that I was going to say, like, to bump James and Watson off the roster, it would take a guy like Hopkins. And I think the team would make the tough choice at that point. Or it would take one of the Rosses or someone else having an unbelievable training camp.
And the real problem with that is you have to extrapolate. And the other part of the problem is we don't know. He can go and run routes. Running routes is the easy part of the NFL when it comes to wide receiver, compared to knowing an offense and being where you're supposed to be at all times.
Right.
That's what's going to make it key for him. He may be able to make plays in one-on-ones. He may be able to even be able to make plays in practice, in the games, in different situations. But can he be where he's supposed to be at all times, or at least 95% of the time? Because if he can do that, that gives him a chance, because that's exactly why Justin Watson's on this roster. He's where he's supposed to be. And that's why Richie James is probably also on the roster, because he's going to be where he's supposed to be. Those guys know what they're doing, and they can adjust in the NFL.
That mental processing thing, doing it in that split second, that's just as much a quote-unquote physical talent as speed. There's some things you can do and some things you can't do. So it'll be interesting to see. I'd be surprised if they signed Hopkins, honestly, but I'm here for it. Just in part, I'm here for it, because it raises the floor of the wide receiver room considerably.
Yeah, no, it would be a lot of fun. And I will say, if Hopkins comes here, I think it actually not only is going to raise the floor of where that wide receiver room is going to be, and raises the ceiling as well. But I think it also gives them the ability to actually use him to teach the young guys things that they're going to pick up from a veteran that they're not going to pick up from guys they already have on the roster. Hopkins knows things that some of the other wide receivers don't. I mean, that's just, he's been an all-pro. He's been one of the best wide receivers in football for years. It's watching how he does things and watching the nuances and how he moves that could teach the young guys a lot. And I think that could be a huge benefit. But I agree with you. I don't know that he's actually going to come here. He's got to be willing to take a little bit less money, or at least a highly incentivized deal. And he'd have to bet on himself. If he takes an incentivized deal, he's willing to bet on himself. And that's going to be the big question. Is he willing to do that? You sit here and you look at the rest of the roster, corner is pretty much already taken care of. We already pretty much have a pretty good idea where that's going to be. Linebacker, I think you have a pretty good idea where that's going to be. Yep. Defensive line, I'd say you have a pretty good idea.
Oh, yeah. But no, they're set. Position group after position group. This is going to be, to paraphrase Nate, the most boring training camp of all time, because you know their safeties generally. The only question is whether or not their third safety will be Edwards or Bush. I'm guessing it'll be Edwards. Their first four corners are largely set. Maybe Chamari Connor jumps in and does something crazy, but like the first five offensive line set, tight end room set. Everything is set, except maybe the wide receiver room is the one where we're just like, I don't know.
But in most seasons, when you have maybe 4 or 5 roster spots available to be taken, this one I'm not even sure there's 2 or 3. Like
I completely agree.
You look at it, and unless they're okay, I will say this. This is the one caveat I will say to that. other than bringing in Hopkins, that could actually open up another spot. But unless they go out and make a trade for somebody or they do something else, there's not going to be a street free agent that's going to come in here and take a roster spot at this point.
It would be almost impossible, barring the Hopkins or the Melvin Ingrams or the Carlos Dunlaps of the world. Because even that'll kind of just bump off someone that, probably a young developing guy like on the defensive line. But that really is, those are the only two, the very back end or the defensive line rotation, one guy. And even that's kind of arguable whether or not you need it. Depends on how much you trust FAU. If you think he can take 600, 700 snaps in year one and be competent, then they really don't need anyone. Because you got Wharton to rotate in for Saunders snaps in terms of the pass rushing snaps, assuming he's healthy. So, then obviously bringing in a Menahu and then drafting FAU, you've really replaced a lot of those snaps in theory. It's just about trusting a rookie there. But there are not a lot of position battles. That's why when people ask me about surprise cuts this year, I'm like, they would have to shock me. They would be shocking cuts. So no, it's gonna be exciting to see. I'm excited to see the Chris Jones thing finalized though. Especially, I don't know if you know this, but I'm kind of a fan. I like Chris Jones. I think he's a really good player. People don't really know that about me. So
yeah. I've never seen you wax eloquent about Chris Jones at all in your life. So
I really appreciate you having me. I miss doing this with you as well as Ryan. It used to be something I got to do every week, and I took it for granted.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to be able to bring you back a little bit more often. So we're going to probably try to have to work on that, and we can talk about that in the future. Thank you so much for coming on. Really do appreciate it. Tomorrow, we're going to actually talk to Mark Schofield, and we're going to talk about Patrick Mahomes. Where can he really improve this coming season on what he's already doing in his career and what he's already done in his career? And then Wednesday, we'll get to talk to Matt about the guys reporting training camp. The QBs are going to be there. The rookies are going to be there. That's what's coming on this week's Locked On Chiefs. So be sure to go check out your other podcasts on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for listening today, and we will talk to you tomorrow.